We are now in the fifth biblical period, conquest and the judges. This is the most exciting period in the Old Testament, as it is in this period where the promise made by God to Abraham more than 400 years earlier is fulfilled. The Israelites have been wandering in and around the desert for 40 years. All the Israelites who crossed the Red Sea have already died, including Moses, except for Joshua and Caleb. Remember those 12 scouts sent by Moses to check on the land at the other side? Joshua and Caleb, yes, they were members of that elite team. Now, on their second attempt to cross the Jordan to the promised land, is very much in sight. This time, they have a new leader, Joshua, the protege of Moses since his youth. Once they occupy the land, their marching order from God is to take control of the land, and that means eliminating the present occupants. The first mission is Jericho. The city was fortified and seemed impenetrable. City walls were huge and thick. Armed guards were watching from their posts and towers. They were ready for any eventualities, including armed battles. The Israelites came prepared as well, not to do battle with the occupants, but to claim the land. Well, their armaments. They have 7 priests with ram horns. And of course, their most powerful and secret weapon is following closely right at the back of the 7 priests. And that is the Ark of the Covenant. Jericho was taken, and not a single shot of arrow was thrown. Only shout of the people and the presence of God. Several more battles took place and more lands occupied. Joshua was successful in most of them. The key to success is trust God and be successful. Do not trust God and you fail. Eventually, Joshua divided the lands among the 12 tribes. And thereafter, Joshua, son of Nun and servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. After his death came a period of the judges. At a time when life is easy and aplenty, people tend to relax. And in Israel's case, they turn unfaithful to God. Well, that is trouble. This period, the judges, is characterized by cycle of sin or unfaithfulness. First of all, they forget about God. Invaders came and oppressed them. They cry out for help. And then God sends a leader, in this case, a judge, to deliver justice, end oppression, and give freedom to Israel. And then life is back to normal again, and in the good graces of God once more, until the cycle begins again and again and again. This is the book of the Judges. Some of the notable judges were Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson. Right now, that is the end of the fifth biblical period. Thank you for listening. God bless us all.
God bless the day. This is Ramon Realizan. We've just gone through dramatic periods in the history of the Israeli people, starting with the confederation of tribes, Abraham, then Jacob with his sons, 12 sons, which composed the 12 tribes. And with Moses, Israel became a nation when they had their exodus. I'd like to draw a parallel between Israel and the Philippines because the Philippines has gone through similar occupation of foreign powers, with the Spaniards having occupied the Philippines for over 300 years, the Americans with about 50 years, and the Japanese with 4 years. So there could have been a mix of cultures. You can just imagine what happened to the Israeli people. Now, I'd like to present four dramatic periods in the history of Israel. The sixth period, the so-called Royal Kingdom. This is considered by the biblical scholars as the golden period of Israel, having a united kingdom. The slide shows the epic battle between David and Goliath, which happened in this particular period. So Samuel, last of the judges, he was a prophet and a priest. Despite his misgivings, anointed the first king. The first king was Saul. But Saul has a problem with his ego. He wants to look good to his people, forgets that his kingship comes from God. Well, David, who conquers Goliath, is a mighty warrior and unites all the tribes into one kingdom. But David committed grave sins of adultery and murder, but was eventually repentant. When Nathan, a prophet and a king, and a priest, I should say, who succeeded Samuel, pointed the sins to David. And David composed and prayed Psalm 51. After David's death, one of his sons, Solomon, builds a temple at Jerusalem. the capital city, the first temple. God gifted Solomon with an extraordinary gift of wisdom. But in spite of this, he eventually gave in to the temptations of lust, wealth, and power. Because of his foreign wives, thus with foreign gods, he succumbed to idolatry. The Queen Mother. This position could have been given significance starting with the reign of Solomon. His mother, Bathsheba, one of the wives of David, got this role. The Queen Mother, who sits at the right side of the king, serves as an advocate of the people, hearing their petitions and presenting them to the king. This could have a foreshadowing of the role of the Blessed Mother Mary as Queen Mother to the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. We come now to the seventh period, the divided kingdom. Here, in this slide, there was a fiery battle or competition between the prophet Elijah and 850 false prophets. Of course, Elijah won over these false prophets. He is part of the period of the divided kingdom. One of the main reasons for the division of the kingdom was Solomon's heavy taxation on his people, just to sustain his kingdom's power and wealth. So the kingdom splits in two. The northern kingdom is called Israel, while the southern kingdom, Judah. Many of the kings of Israel and Judah worship foreign gods and allow injustice in the kingdom. So God calls prophets like Elijah and Elisha to tell the people to obey their covenant with God. The prophets disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed, as they say. Prophets like Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah warn the people to, to stop idolatry, practice justice, and worship God with sincerity, and to care for people in need. Under Israel, from 930 BC, when they split, the first king was Jeroboam up to 722 BC. With the fall of Samaria, the capital of Israel, Hosea was the last king. Their period was characterized by political turmoil, assassination, overthrow of dynasties. There was no good king out of the 20. While in Judah, the first king was Rehoboam up to 586 BC with the fall of Jerusalem, and the last king was Zedekiah. They had some good rulers and some bad ones. The dynasty of King David continued unbroken except for the usurper Queen Athaliah. The prominently good kings were Hezekiah and Josiah, who attempted religious reform. They strived to end the worship of idols. The office of the prophet was not hereditary. Sometimes the call just came suddenly. Just in the case of Isaiah, the calling of Isaiah, this has touched your lips, and now your guilt is gone, and your sins are forgiven. Because Isaiah felt he was not worthy of the calling. But God touched his lips. Isaiah had a long prophetic ministry which spanned 55 years. Has been under four kings. The last one was Hezekiah. Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a young man when he was called by God, and he was very uncertain. No? So he felt not worthy of the call. But God told him, do not say you are too young, but go to the people I sent you to and tell them everything I command you to say. Do not be afraid, for I will bless you to protect you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Jeremiah has been called the prophet of lamentations because he has gone through difficult ministry as a prophet. Now we go to the eighth period, the exile. This is the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Despite the warnings of the prophets, the people of Israel and Judah continued to turn away from God's covenant with them. Parang hindi pa naalis yung kanilang experience sa Egypt, no? Pabalik-balik, no? So, yun ang kanilang addiction. Ika nga. So, God lets the kingdoms be conquered and the rulers overthrown. The Assyrians conquered Israel in 721 BC, while the Babylonians conquered Judah in 587 BC. Many of the people are taken into captivity, so that this period of salvation history is called the exile. You see, the exile is a key event in the history of Israel, because during and after the exile, the Israelites rewrite much of the sacred scriptures. This is where they had serious, real to goodness reflection on what had happened to them and what they should have done. They lost the external structures that held them together: the land of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, the temple, the monarchy, and the priesthood. They just realized that the prophet's warnings were true. Ika nga, God will let you reap what you sow. So, hinayaan silang magdusa para ma-realize nila yung kanilang kamalian and learn from their lessons. Now we go to the ninth period, the return, showing the rebuilding of the Temple of Jerusalem, which will become the second temple. 50 years have passed in exile, and a new Persian king, Cyrus, a pagan, allows the people, now called Judeans or Jews, to return to build Jerusalem in the temple. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah tell how the people saw God's hand at work during their struggles and successes, the experience and the process. They also listened to their religious leader, Ezra, who explained to them the law or Torah and how to observe it strictly. But he decreed no marriage with foreigners or intermarriages. They had to divorce their foreign spouses. The strict measure was to safeguard the purity of their religion. Thus, Judaism was born, and Ezra was considered its father. Nehemiah faced great opposition to the task God gave him, yet with God's grace, he succeeded. It took them 20 years to reconstruct the temple, and the city walls surrounding Jerusalem took them 52 days to finish. We come now to the 10th biblical period, the so-called Maccabean Revolt. At this stage, the Greeks took over Palestine. Alexander the Great became king at age 20. He was taught by Aristotle, the philosopher. He was considered one of the greatest military geniuses at the time. And he defeated King Darius of Persia in about 333 BC. He personally went to Jerusalem to punish the Jews for not submitting tributes. But later, he allowed the Jews to practice their religion, but pushed for Hellenization, that is, making the world Greek. But he died early, age 32, of an unknown disease. So we had to divide the Greek Empire had to be divided among the generals of Alexander the Great. initially among four, but eventually into two. One for the Ptolemies in Alexandria, Egypt, and the Seleucids in Syria. These two groups, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, fought each other. It was the Ptolemies who first governed Palestine, but because they were defeated by the Seleucids, now the Seleucids took over Palestine. But the government of the Seleucids were not too good for the Israelites, for the Jews, because the ruler at that time, the Greek ruler, strictly established Greek culture in Israel and put statues of Greek gods in the temple. He even ordered the desecration of the temple by offering pigs inside. So, in response to this, a Jewish family, the Asmoneans, also called the Maccabees, led a successful revolt against the Greeks and was able to restore Jewish independence for about 100 years. The Maccabeans restored the rightful priests and rescued the desecrated temple with a feast of the rededication called Hanukkah. However, the period that followed was one of war, violence, and infighting, no, among the brothers of Judas Maccabeus who succeeded him. So, meanwhile, the Romans defeated the Greeks. They destroyed Corinth in 146 BC, began direct rule over Greece and Palestine, whom they occupied and made a Roman province. This eventually led to Herod being made the king of Judea by the Roman emperor and senate. It was Herod the king who Herod the king. It was his time when Jesus was born. But this would be the nation that taxed and controlled the Jews and eventually executed the Messiah on a Roman cross. So there was a mixture of cultures in Judea, the Roman, the Greek, and Hebrew. During this troubled time, they hoped for a Messiah to make them great again. And there arose new Jewish groups where each group emphasizes a different approach to living the Jewish faith. The first, or the essence, it's a communal ascetic group. They believe in a new covenant end time community, the coming of two messiahs, one spiritual and the other political. And they believe also in immortality, but not in resurrection. One of the prominent members of this group was John the Baptist. Then the Pharisees, they strictly observed the Mosaic laws and the oral tradition. They believe in divine providence, the existence of both angels and demons, rewards and punishment in afterlife. Then the Sadducees, they belonged to the tribe of Levi. They were an aristocratic party that ruled the temple and Sanhedrin. Sila yung mga priests. But they only believe in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. They rejected the doctrine of resurrection and immortality. They do not believe in the existence of angels or spirits. So, this is the close of the Old Testament in salvation history. In review, we had Egypt, where the Israelites stayed for about 430 years, and came the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, then the Persians, the Greeks, and finally the Romans. So this is a very colorful story, of the Old Testament. From the time of Abraham up to the time of the Roman Empire.